As Julie said, I did start this meetup in London nearly 8 years ago now, just to be able to meet other product people. I think we had about 25 people at that very first meetup, so it's grown a little bit since then, now that we're in 140 cities around the world. And as you probably realized from Julie's introduction, it is all down to the local volunteers. It is all run by product people for product people. So I am going to make you applaud one more time for Julie and her team for all the hard work that they do. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my view on building awesome product teams. As Julie said, I've been doing this for a very long time. I'm also sometimes better known as the big friendly giant of product for reasons which should be obvious here on stage today. But I've been doing this basically since the internet came on floppies. In fact, I can claim to have beaten Snapchat, Periscope, and Facebook Live to the punch by hosting the first online live stream in Europe way back in 1997. Of course, it did take a giant satellite truck and 5 engineers from the local telco just to make the thing run. The video resolution was so terrible, I don't even have a screenshot to share with you guys. And since it was a student orchestra festival, I'm not sure the sound was much better. But it worked. Fast forward many years later, and I was working for a startup in London in 2010, building software as a service collaboration software. Imagine, if you will, the office behind these gates down in the basement, with all the usual startup paraphernalia. We had naked brick walls, we had whiteboards and post-it notes everywhere. We had a foosball table in one corner, an Xbox table in the other corner, the occasional cockroach skittering across the floor. And we'd gathered the entire team around one of those whiteboards to do a retrospective on a recent release that we'd done. Now, this was the biggest release that we'd done since I joined as the VP of Products. We'd totally rewritten and redesigned a core part of the feature set. And at that retro, we went through all the stats. Everything had gone amazingly. Everything was going up and to the right, just like you wanted to do. Engagement was up, conversion was up, customer satisfaction was up. Even the team was pretty happy, which is a feat in and of itself since they look like this most of the time. But what I realized at that retro was that although this was one of the biggest releases that we'd done, I hadn't actually written a single story that went into that. And I hadn't done a single wireframe that went into that. Because this is not about a hero product manager. This is not about a genius designer. It's not about an amazing boss. It's not actually about me. Because product management is not about product. Product management is about people. And as Julie said, I've spent the last 2 years trying to figure out what it is the magic behind these teams, what it is that makes these teams tick. And me and my co-authors were out interviewing product leaders from all over the world, escaping to writing retreats like this. It's a really hard life being a product manager and an author. And some of what we came up with is what I want to talk about today. So like any good heist movie, it starts with assembling your team. You guys might recognize this Venn diagram. If nothing else, it's part of the logo for Mind the Product and Product Inc. But I wrote this about 7 years ago, defining product management as the intersection of the customer, technology, and the business. And the challenge with this is that it means a lot of people think that everyone in the team needs to look like this. When of course we all look like this, or this. And it's only when we actually bring the whole team together that we have all the skills necessary to build great products. So it's worth really thinking about what skills you need on that team as you're assembling it. And not just those 3 axes, and not even the ones that I'm going to show you in a second, but really thinking about what it is that you need in your team. Do you need different work experience, industry knowledge, creativity, culture, life experience? And as you map these things out, you can map your team against them and figure out where you have gaps that you might need to fill. And this diversity in our product teams is so important. And I'm not just talking about the diversity, obviously, of gender and ethnicity, which are absolute table stakes for me, but about different contexts and different experiences as well. Because at the end of the day, our job is to have empathy with our customers. And the more different contexts that we're exposed to within our teams, the more likely we are to be able to have that empathy outside of our teams. At the end of the day, product is a team sport. And as, again, Julie hinted at earlier, we don't see this as being about the product manager. Because I don't care if your title is product manager, product owner, business analyst, designer, engineer, UX. I think we are all product people and we all own the product together. As Marty Kagan, who's probably the godfather of modern product management, said, if you're only using your engineers to code, you're only getting half of their value. And I'd argue that's the same for all of us. If you're only using your designers to push pixels, you're probably only getting half of their value. If you're only using your product managers to groom backlogs, you're probably getting half their value. So think about how you can bring all those people together into one cross-functional team. And cross-functional is really important for two reasons. Number one, by bringing all that into one team, you can bring together the problem space that the user researchers, designers, marketing can bring to the table, and the solution space that engineering and design can bring to the table. And that's where you find that opportunity for great products. It's also important because, as we know, as soon as you have more than one team in an organization, you introduce friction. This is why we have libraries full of project management methodologies, prioritization methodologies, inboxes. All of these tools are literally to manage one team needing help from another team. So when I mean cross-functional, I mean truly cross-functional. Thinking about all of the skills, all the teams that you might need represented in a product team. My favorite example of this is a startup in London called TransferWise. It's an online currency transfer platform, and they have a team called the Currencies team. Now this team's job is to set up new currency transfer paths. For example, when they launched pounds to dollars, this was the team that did that. As you can imagine, it's a little bit more complicated than just adding a drop-down and putting USD in the drop-down. You have to open bank accounts in the local country. You have to set up new terms and conditions. You have to make sure that you're complying with local money laundering and securities laws. And in any other organization, that team would have to go to the legal department and ask to change the terms and conditions. And then once that's done, they'd have to go to the banking department and ask them to open a bank account. But TransferWise have embraced properly cross-functional teams. And that team doesn't just have a product manager, a designer, and engineers. They have a lawyer and a banker embedded in the team so that they have everything they need to execute on their goals without having to go to another team. This is also why I think it's really important that these teams are co-located. I know this is a challenge for some organizations. I've already had a few conversations about that here tonight. But the high bandwidth communication that you can get by sitting together in a room is just so valuable. I think it's much more important to actually be sitting together than to be near the customer. Even though ideally, of course, UX and product go talk to the customer a lot and bring that information back, once you can bring back that insight, that research, being able to come up with the best possible solution takes the whole team. Even the world's probably most famous product designers know this. So Johnny Ive and Apple, a lot of people assume, for some reason, that they kind of design everything in an ivory tower, that all these great products came out of the mind of Steve Jobs and then Johnny Ive. They don't really need anyone else. But actually, if you look at how they work, and you look at why they built their new insane headquarters, it's all about cross-functional, co-located teams. It's a stunning piece of design, but what really excites me about Apple's new headquarters is that it's the physical embodiment of this principle. A huge reason for the design of this campus was being able to encourage these different skills to sit together. And Johnny Ive himself said that's one of the things that he's most excited about with this new campus. That they can have their industrial designers sitting next to a font designer, sitting next to a sound designer, a motion graphics expert, a color designer, soft materials expert, etc. And they've designed the whole building around that. So now that we've assembled our team, it's important to think about how we set them up for success. And really thinking about what it is that makes a team successful. How many of you heard of Project Aristotle at Google? always less hands than I think. This was an amazing study that Google did down in the valley, looking at all of their product and engineering teams to figure out what it was that actually made them successful. Being Google, they measured hundreds of data points for every team over, I think, 2 years. Being Google, they assumed that the more Stanford engineers you can cram into a team, the more successful it would be. But of course, they realized that that had no actual correlation with success. And what they found were 5 principles that you've probably heard about since then that are the keys to team success. And the number one by far was a concept called psychological safety. Now, Google didn't invent this. There's a lot of other work that's gone into this before that. But they found that the teams that felt the most psychologically safe were the ones that were by far the most likely to succeed. Psychological safety means that the members of a team are more likely to admit mistakes, take on new roles and challenges, harness new diverse ideas, and challenge the status quo. I think we can all agree those are things we would like our teams to be able to do. It's also important to think about what it is that motivates that team. I think a lot of us, and a lot of organizations, I should say, are stuck in kind of an old school way of thinking about monetary compensation. How many of you have heard of Daniel Pink and his book, Drive? A few more hands. There's also a great Cliff Notes TED Talk if you want to skip reading the book. But the book is basically about a ton of research that came out of MIT that was specifically looking at this motivation aspect. And what they found was that as soon as you pay people enough, so market salary and some nice bonuses, adding on financial compensation, so a bonus for more success or a bonus for more innovative ideas, didn't actually have any outcome. Instead, they found, again, 3 factors, always comes in threes, that do motivate people at that point: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is our desire to be self-directed, and it increases engagement over compliance. Mastery is the urge to get better skills and master our craft, which is hopefully why you're all here today. And purpose is a desire to do something that has meaning and is important. So the more you can find aspects of these 3 things to motivate your team, the more you can align your goals around these 3 things, the more likely you are for that team to succeed. And then you have to pick how you want to lead. There are, again, 3 main ways of leadership: authoritative, participative, and delegative. Authoritative is where the leader sets clear expectations, makes all the decisions with little or no input. It's very task-driven, and it works well when labor is low-skilled and the leader has all the knowledge and experience. And as you can tell by the reference to labor, this works great if you're an 18th century factory. Not so much today. Participative leadership is where the leader gives hands-on guidance, gets input from the team, but retains that final decision-making. It's very collaborative, and it's kind of modern management theory, probably how most of you work, where workers have some knowledge, but leadership retains that decision-making at the top. Delegative leadership is where the leader gives high-level guidance. There's still a huge role for leadership to play, but they give decision-making out to autonomous teams. It's people-driven, and it works great for creative jobs and knowledge workers like us. Autonomy simply works better because it motivates people better, as we've seen. It scales better because you can spin up new teams much more easily than just adding people to an existing team. And it means that you can stay quick and nimble no matter how large the whole organization grows. It also works better because if we're being honest, our teams are smarter than we are. They have more information than we do. They're closer to the customer than we are. So why are we telling them what to do? Now, a lot of people hear this and they assume it means anarchy. Autonomy means everyone can do whatever they want, so how are we all going to go in the same direction? But the key here is, again, for leadership to be there, to build that alignment and to build that accountability so that everyone's pulling in the same direction, even if they're figuring out exactly how to get there themselves. Henrik Nieberg, who's the organizational coach and agile coach behind the somewhat famous Spotify model around tribes and squads that you might have heard of, has this great 2x2 lining up alignment versus autonomy. And if you start in the bottom with low autonomy and low alignment, this is the kind of micromanaging organization with an indifferent culture. Everyone's kind of doing different things, pulling in different directions. If you move up the alignment scale, it's the manager's there to tell you what to do and how to do it. It's a very authoritative organization. Everyone's pulling in the same direction, but it's very conformist. You're unlikely to come up with great new ideas. If you instead move up the autonomy scale, you kind of hope someone's working on the problem. Everyone's doing whatever they want. This is your classic startup, very entrepreneurial, very chaotic. And of course, like any good 2x2, if you're a consultant, you know this, you have to be in the top right corner. High alignment, high autonomy, which is where the leader's still there to set that goal, as I said, but the team is there to figure out how. And that is how you build an innovative organization and a collaborative culture. And it starts with how you set goals. So in a traditional organization, you'd start with the company goals. You'd go tell each team, this is what you're going to do to contribute to this goal. The team goes and tells the individual, this is what you're going to do to contribute to this team goal. And then a quarter later or a year later, whatever your planning window is, you realize you missed all your goals and you're not quite sure why. With autonomous teams, you still start with that company vision, the company goal, but then you step back. And you let each team go and figure out how they can actually contribute to that goal, what they're willing to commit to contribute to that goal. And the beauty is, as they start reporting back what their commitments are, you can pretty quickly see you might have a gap. And that's information you can use. Maybe Team B needs some help to achieve more or to take on bigger ideas or try something new. Maybe you need to spin up a new team or a new business area in order to hit the overall company goal that you have. But again, the beauty is you know this before your planning window is even started. And it also, as we talked about this whole talk, gives that autonomy to the team to own their own mission, to own that goal that they've set themselves that quarter or that year. And that obviously aligns a lot with how we measure success. So you've probably all heard this famous quote that people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. But I'd argue we need to think even deeper about this question and ask why. Why do they want that hole? What are they actually trying to achieve? Because if you understand what it is the customer wants, maybe they want to get sound from the living room to the bedroom, so they want to drill a hole to be able to put some speaker wire through. Maybe they're trying to hang up a picture. If you understand what it is they're trying to achieve, you know what the outcome is and you know how to solve that problem. Every good talk needs an Einstein quote, so he once said that if you had an hour to save the planet, he would spend 59 minutes defining the problem because then resolving it would be easy. Ken Norton, slightly less famous, but still a hero of mine, said that when you understand the problem at a deep level, then success is easy to articulate because you know what it's like when that problem is solved. So it's a simplistic example, but if we use that example of the hole in the wall, if you know what they're trying to do is run speaker cable through, there might be other solutions to that. We can use Sonos, we can use something else. But you know it's solved by the fact that you hear music in the bedroom. So if you know what that outcome is, you know how to measure it. Which brings me on to a little bugbear of mine, just to throw in some detail here. There's a lot of debate about quantitative information versus qualitative information. Some organizations swear by data alone, some swear by user research alone. And hopefully most of you in this room know that you really need both in order to make these decisions. Because the quantitative information will tell you what happened, but the qualitative information will tell you why it happened. And you need both. So we set up our team, we set them up for success. Finally, we need to figure out how to pick the right process. Another rabbit hole that we product managers get stuck in a lot. One of my absolute favorite quotes comes from Peter Drucker, who's probably one of the most prolific business writers of this century, who said that there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency that which should not be done at all. And I think as product managers, as engineering managers, we kind of got sidelined into this, and we got so focused on efficiency that we forgot to make sure that we should build a thing in the first place, that the customer actually wants it. And it comes down to this balance of discovery versus delivery. A lot of the methodologies that we use today, Prince 2, Six Sigma, Waterfall, Lean Kanban, Agile Scrum, whatever it is that you use, comes from the Toyota production system. And they're fantastic if you've designed a car and you want to build it as cheaply, efficiently, and error-free as possible. But we forget that the team that designed the car doesn't work that way. They can't work that way because they don't know what they're going to build yet. And there's a ton of methodologies on that side as well. The UX people and the researchers in the room should be nodding along at this point. But the key for us as product leaders is to make sure that we're balancing these two sides. Because at the end of the day, there is no line between these two. It's a constant process. It's a constant process of defining the problem, designing solutions, delivering that, and then measuring whether you actually succeeded or not. The balance is all about making sure that you build the right thing as well as build the thing right. So beware the dogma of any of these methodologies that come out. There is no one right way to do this. There's a right approach, there's a right way to think about it, which is customer-centric. But the actual methodology you use depends on what the team needs. The Agile Manifesto itself, which I'm a huge fan of, says that we value responding to change over following a plan. And what is Lean or Scrum or Agile but a plan? You need to pick the best parts for your team and figure out what it is that is going to make you and your team successful. So to wrap up, John Maeda, who's a famous designer, said that don't forget that people make the stuff. Relationships make the bigger stuff. So get those parts first, and the rest will follow. Assemble your team by making sure that they're diverse, cross-functional, and co-located. Set them up for success by thinking about psychological safety, autonomy, and purpose. And then pick the right process, making sure that you're balancing discovery and delivery. Or to sum up this entire talk in one slide, hire smart people, get the hell out of the way, and focus on outcomes. Because product management's not about products, product management's about people. Thank you very much.
So G2, you started by saying that product managers are really high leverage roles. And then you said how hunger and curiosity is so important. So how do you go about actually finding that in the people you hire? Because it's really hard.
It is really hard, and I think you have to be picky. And by the way, hunger and curiosity is not uniform across different experiences. So there are certain experiences might actually make you more hungry and motivated than others. And it's really important that in your interview cycle, when you're going out and sourcing for candidates, that you're just completely leveling with them on what the problem is you're trying to solve, and whether or not that problem that you're trying to solve is one that gets them excited. Because I'll tell you this, it becomes a whole lot easier to get hungry when you have a problem that actually intrinsically appeals to you, right? But it's very hard to get hungry when the problem itself seems extraneous. So, and by the way, that is not something that's standardized. Like, some people might think of a problem around, cloud content management that we do at Box as like, you're managing documents for a living, dude. Like, that seems like a very uninspiring thing. Other people might think about that and go, Stanford Medical Hospital diagnoses cancer based on the system that we have. And Metropolitan Police goes out and saves lives based on the CCTV footage that they take that actually gets to the people on the right time, because we are an indirect business. And if someone is really excited about going out and having a piece of work done that can go scale to multiple different indirect businesses, that intrinsically makes them hungry. And I think that's much more, it's not a trick interview question, are you hungry about this problem or not? I think you have to spend enough time to know whether or not that problem, based on that individual's background and life, is in fact going to meet where it's going to be like, wow, this is something that I really, really want to do. By the way, the best thing that we do, I tend to do this in my interview cycles, is I'm usually the last interview of anyone, and about 45, if it's an hour interview, 45 minutes, I will try to sell the person on not taking the job. And if they're still convinced that they really, really want to do it, then like you've had some indicator that this is a good idea to do. And so I would really make sure that it's very problem specific and individual specific. And by the way, the diversity really matters here, because if you have a team that's diverse, I don't believe in diversity just at the large numbers of the company level, because it's completely non-instructive, right? Diversity at a team level is super important. And so when you have, every team should be configured in a way that comes with different backgrounds that are solving a problem in a different way. And that really creates a level of energy and hunger for solving a problem that will actually have a much greater impact than you or your life would have. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of tests you can use for it as well, like litmus tests throughout the process, because I agree that those two, like that passion and that learning is incredibly important for product managers. So on the passion side, I think there's ways you can tease it out throughout the interview process of how prepared they've come to the interview. Are they excited about the problem you're trying to solve for a customer, or are they excited about the perks in the cool office or whatever, right? You can start teasing out those things throughout the whole interview process, I think. And on the learning side, for me, it's a lot about the language that the product manager uses when you're interviewing them. So are they talking about things they tried and what they learned from it, or are they talking about just all of their big successes kind of stuff, right? I think the final words in our book is basically always be learning. I think it's kind of what product management's all about. So the more an interview candidate talks about what they learned, how they came up with a hypothesis, how they tested a hypothesis, what they learned from a failed hypothesis, et cetera, the more likely they are to continue that kind of mentality.
Hello, thank you both. I had a question for both of you as product leaders. How do you inspire your teams to think about the moral and ethical dimensions of the things that they're building, especially if you encourage them to think 10 times and really ambitious? So just curious what your approach is.
For me, I think it's all about anchoring it with real people at the end of the day, right? I think the technology world and drug dealers have one thing in common, and that we call our users, right? It's kind of a weird thing that we use to talk about our customers. And I think a lot of the time, the organizations that don't kind of have this user research mentality kind of embedded in the team, you get it third hand and it's just a couple of numbers moving around, and it's much easier to forget about the kind of ethical implications of what you're doing. Whereas if you have that user research embedded, you are looking at videos or meeting customers every week, it's much easier to see them as real human beings that have real problems, and that you might not want to mess around with their product too much because you're actually going to get in the way of their life or whatever it is. And I think that it's making it human, basically, that helps you find that connection with your customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think there's, in some ways, Silicon Valley has regressed a little bit in the past few years. And let me be very specific about it. There's this tremendous science around making products addictive that's actually taken a pretty high amount of momentum. And I actually think that's bad for humanity. Right? Anything that is addictive is not good. Addictive, by definition, addictive is you're doing it as a habit beyond what you should be doing, and you should stop, right? And we are saying there's teams that are built that are actually going out and saying, let's give it a fix. And so it's just wrong, right, in some ways. And so what I would say is, there is a responsibility that we have as a society, and especially where a lot of the innovation is starting to originate from, where don't focus on usage and time spent as much as you're focusing on intrinsic value that your product is creating and a problem that you're solving. And I think we owe it to society to make sure that we are building products that way, because it's plain flat out unethical doing it any other way, right? And so, and I feel like I personally have, and by the way, this is not like, X company is bad and we're holier than thou. It's like I've gotten sucked into this as well, and it's just started occurring to me about a year ago that this is just wrong, because like just because I use a product a lot doesn't mean that it actually makes me happier. And it doesn't mean that it makes me more productive. In fact, some of the products I use a lot, I fucking hate those products, right? But I just don't want, I don't have a choice. I'm like going back to the thing over and over again. Like sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and I don't have anything to do, and we're having this great conversation, and I'll do this. I'm like, why am I doing this? I don't understand. Like, I don't need to look at email. I'm having a really engaging dialogue. Why is it that I'm going back? And that kind of dopamine rush, we have to make sure that as product people, we're focusing far more on what's the core value that we're creating for our users, or the people that are using our product, rather than I'm just going to do this because the metrics are nice and I'm actually going to make money from it. And I think it's just we have to start keeping ourselves in check. Here's the one kind of the piece of request I'd have for this room. Just like product management's a very leveraged role, we as a society in Silicon Valley are massively leveraged, because like there's a lot of the world that actually takes lead from us. So we have a responsibility beyond just filling our checkbooks and having great jobs and great lives and great careers, in doing things that are just pure foundationally ethical and good for humanity in everything that you do. And I don't think they have to be serially done. You don't have to first have a lot of money made, then after that you're going to do things that are good for humanity. While you're making money, you can actually do the good things that are good for humanity. And so that would be my guidance: is don't obsess too much on growth without purpose and value.
Hi.
I think we can do a little announcement on that one as well, which is that Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Hooked, that kind of popularized a lot of these things around addictive apps and things like that. He's spoken on our stage before, but he's coming back to the July conference here in San Francisco to speak specifically about the ethics of it, because he's kind of horrified by what he has done and how people have misunderstood and misused a lot of these techniques. So I think that should be a really interesting one to look out for in July.
Hi, Martin. I had a question about autonomy. I thought it was really good saying what you're doing is giving the sort of teams at the lowest level a choice in how to implement the goals, because it sort of short circuits this problem about when the sort of leadership gets it wrong, and so that's sort of what the question is about. What do you do in this sort of situation when the goals are like incorrect? How does that information filter back up to the leadership from down below?
I think, again, when I did this talk, sometimes a lot of people take away that like, oh, well, there is no job for product managers anymore. There's no job for leaders, because like the teams are going to make all the decisions, right? And I think it's just not true. The role for leadership changes from being kind of figuring out what to tell people to do to making sure that the organization's headed in the right direction, right? So I think it comes back to that always be learning loop as well. Like it's incumbent on the product leadership itself and the company leadership to be making sure that they're always headed in the right direction for whatever that product vision is, that big purpose, that big customer problem that they're trying to solve, and making course corrections along the way, right? I mean, product leadership should still be in those conversations. They should still be sitting in with the teams as they're making those decisions. They should still be checking in on the data along the way. They should still be out talking to customers and figuring all this stuff out as well, to make sure that the whole organization's pointing in the right direction, while each team's figuring out how to execute on their problem. So it's kind of, it might not be a detailed answer, but it's basically making sure that you're always checking in on that, just like you would as a product manager with your product within your small team, that you're always course correcting and making sure that you're headed the right direction. That's the leader's job at the bigger scale.
So it's like you're in the low level and you start seeing a gap develop, and that's when you can correct.
Yeah, and it's definitely two-way communication, right? I mean, it's all about, the product leader's job really is all about communication. It's all about making sure that all these people have the information they need to execute, but also to be the person that's, you're by definition one of the few people that's talking to all the teams, right? So kind of you have the bigger picture information that each individual team doesn't have. It's then your job to make sure they all get that bigger picture as well. But that's where it's kind of a two-way communication to make sure that you're course correcting the big picture at the same time.
One thing that's philosophically might be worth thinking about is, many of you might be leaders in organizations, many of you are aspiring to be. Think about this. The higher you go up in the organization, the farther away you're from fact, right? And so it's extremely important that if you're in a debate with someone, in a company. Like if I'm in a debate with someone who's an IC product manager, I expect that person to win the debate 9 out of 10 times because they're actually closer to the data. The only thing I have over them is better pattern recognition, because I might see more kind of broader pieces. But like it's the closer you're to the data, the more facts you're going to have about the system, and you're just going to have, as a result, you should have more autonomy by definition. Now, if your leadership doesn't believe in that, then it is your job to convince them that that is the way that they should be looking at it. And if they don't look at it that way, you have one or two things: either poor judgment in going to a company which doesn't believe in autonomy for the people, or poor communication on your end to not be able to convince the leaders. But either which way, you have to make sure that the people that are closest to the work are the ones that are making most of the decisions, and then you're able to go out and do pattern recognition at the top so that you can kind of course correct.
Don't know how to turn on the microphone. Thank you for the talks. They're both very thought-provoking. I was just wondering if you have any advice about how to measure or examples of how you've incorporated user experiences that people love. I work at a company, and one of our principles is make your software a joy to use, which I completely agree with. And I think if you probably both have good stories or advice about how you've done that and how you've prioritized that in your past experience.
Yep.
So we'll start.
Sure. So we have an interesting business because we actually serve 3 stakeholders. So we have, every time I say users now, I'm going to feel like I'm a drug dealer or something. But we have end users. We've got the enterprise IT professional, the security, professional, everyone from the CIO's office, and then we've got developers. And those are the 3 stakeholders. So the way that we've done our, even our org structure is designed based on those three stakeholders. Our product lines are designed based on those 3 stakeholders. And the way that we are trying to continue to perfect that, the love quotient on the pieces is there both qualitative and quantitative measures that tell you whether a use case completed all the way and how efficiently it completed all the way. And then nothing can replace talking to customers and seeing how many kind of referrals you have. Because here's the thing that's magical. If you have to ask whether people love your product, chances are they don't, right? Because you will have people, when they love your product, come and tell you about it. So you don't need to have very sophisticated metrics about it. Just build something that you think is going to be loved by people. And if they're not coming and telling you about it, keep trying. Because eventually they will, or you're not trying hard enough in the right ways. It's very binary, very simple. No.
I think it's, I agree with that. I think it's also true to say that there isn't one metric, right? I think that's a challenge. We always look at, and there's been a huge amount of debate recently, if you've seen about the Net Promoter Score, Jared Spool kind of tearing it apart, and a lot of people arguing against that. And the challenge is with Net Promoter Score, which I like, Jenna hates, is that if you try to reduce it to just a number, then it's not a very good metric, right? It's only valuable in conjunction with the qualitative feedback that comes with it. It's also only valuable in conjunction with a bigger program of analytics looking at the leading indicators like engagement, usage, activation, retention, whatever it is that you're looking at, and then the lagging indicators like NPS and referrals and promotions, stuff like that. So I think the challenge with this is we love simplicity and we want that one number, and it's usually good to have one number as your goal, but when it comes to user experience, it's just too hard to, there is no one number. It's a huge combination of different numbers and qualitative feedback.
Hi, my name's Thomas. I wanted to come back on one of the points that we talked about, which I think was quite interesting, is I think there's a bit of a paradox in the sense that we don't want to create addictive products, but the second point of the presentation was about retention and how we get people to come back on our products. And I feel like as a product manager, you're always riding that line of a paradox where you think about customer first, but in the end, you're also focusing about business value and how much cost, how much money you can make out of your product. And I was wondering if you had any tips, metrics you look at, or processes you put in place to keep yourself in check in writing that line and not falling in one or the other.
Yes, we fall into this trap a lot at Box, and we have to keep course correcting ourselves. We are very we've got a lot of metrics. right? And what ends up happening sometimes is you look at all these metrics and you can then have people starting to beat the system because they're trying to go out and build something for the metric rather than the problem. So retention drives growth, but the way that you go out and deeply understand retention is the assessment of value that is being created because of which retention occurs, right? And that assessment of value is pretty important rather than just looking at a plain number. So I think Martin had it on the user research as well as data analytics, and you need both because on one side it tells you what, and the other side it tells you why. I think if you don't have those effectively done, then you can tend to actually have a blind side where you can actually start building things which are looking great numbers-wise, but aren't really going out and intrinsically solving a problem that's actually creating delight. And that frankly is, I don't think there's a silver bullet. Like, you have to keep talking to customers. The thing that you can have happen as you get bigger is you can't get one overly influenced by too many big customers, but you also can't make sure that you get too distant from customers. And it's a really fine balance you have to have in product management, whereas customers don't need to give you ideas on features. Customers need to give you very clear articulation on problems that you then need to figure out a way to manifest into features and then see if those features are creating value the way that you anticipated that it was going to create value. And I think that it's a softer skill rather than something that you have a single metric for, but we spend a fair amount of time on, I'll give you an example. We recently came out with a product called Feed, and the Feed, basically there's 3 mechanisms of going out and perusing through your content. One of them is browsing, but at some point in time you've got way too much content in your system, you can't browse enough because folder structure is ineffective, so then you search, but the problem with search is you need to know exactly what you're searching for, so at some point it becomes pretty irrelevant, so then you have these feeds that actually give you recommendations based on what you might be doing. Right now, we are maniacally obsessed about not just the click data, but understanding the software components of, is this stuff that's probably not being clicked still creating value, and is the stuff that's sometimes being clicked not creating value? And how do you go out and assess that through kind of user research and studies that are being done on that front and doing some interviews? Because otherwise you'll actually have data will take you in the wrong direction and you'll start building addictive products that might not actually create intrinsic value. So I think it's just a hard problem to solve, but if you don't have both those components, you'll actually miss the boat.
And I think that's actually a great example of the dichotomy that we have in data, in that, if you're optimizing for clicks and you're optimizing for usage, you might actually create a worse search experience because you're going to get more clicks because the person's searching for more stuff. Whereas if you build a better product, they're getting to the thing in less clicks. And I think the bottom line for me is to actually start thinking much more about customer outcomes and customer value. That's the North Star we should all be pointing towards. All these other metrics are really proxies and ways that we might be figuring out, are we heading in that right direction?
Here's a metric I really don't like. I hate the metric time spent.
Yeah.
I can't stand that metric because what it does is it actually completely, in fact, if you think about it intellectually, it's like, oh, if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, do you want someone spending 6 hours in your freaking product? Like, you should be able to get it out, in and out of there faster than that. So like, time spent as a metric, I think, is massively destructive to society in general, in my opinion.
And I think this is a challenge largely in the B2C world, because at the end of the day, the user, using that word again, is not the customer, they are the product, right? So that's where you get these weird things like time on site and daily active users as your North Star, because you want as many page views for your advertisers as possible. I think a company that does this really well, that you wouldn't think of as the most exciting products in the world, but Intuit and their kind of suite of tools. Yep. If you really look at how they measure things and how they think about products, they all look about the customer value, right? And another great example, we're in tax season, and how many of you want to do your tax every day, right? You don't really want to. You don't want to do it every year, but at some point you have to, and their metric is all about how much money are they saving you a year, or how much are they getting you back. And the more they can affect that number, the more likely you are to come back next year and use them again and pay for the service again. And they have tons of examples like that, like when they're doing small business tools, it's about how much money they can save that small business owner by not having to do certain processes or processing payments faster or whatever it is. It's all about that outcome at the end of the day for the customer. And that's what they measure towards. Everything else that we use, like I said, is just a proxy or a way of trying to figure out, are we heading in the right direction to deliver that value for the customer? And the problem is a lot of the time we get bogged down on those because they're really nice and easy to measure, right? We have great dashboards and we have all these tools, and we're like, great, I've got time on site up, but have actually solved the customer problem. We kind of have to make sure that we go through all the way to that qualitative information of have we actually solved the problem, have we actually delivered value to the customer, and that's the North Star.
We have time for 3 more questions, and then we'll take the conversation offline.
Someone
okay?
behind me.
Is the mic already? Feel free to ask the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the great conversations. My first question is for Martin. I really like the point you made about how our processes are predominantly focused on essentially increasing efficacy, right? As if we know what problem we want to solve and we're going about doing that. How do you think in a tangible way teams should be focused on identifying the problem as opposed to just focusing on solving it? It's something that I've come across multiple times as well, but and everybody talks about the problem, but I haven't seen a great solution yet. And the second question about that addiction and page views, as much as you hated G2 time spent, what do you think the solution is for B2C products that are not like Intuit, which clearly drives a clear value to the customers, but the ones that are ads driven?
Yep.
So, starting with the organizational point, I want to underline that there's nothing wrong with efficiency, but I think obviously efficiency to the point of not, building the wrong thing really fast is not a good thing. I think that the only way to do it is this kind of combination of everything that we've been talking about today, right? Is having a small nuclear team that has access to the customer, that owns a customer problem, that has a purpose behind it, has a mission that they're trying to solve, that is exposed to the actual customer and the customer problem repeatedly so that they buy into that and understand what it is they're trying to solve. That example that I was talking about, we were actually trying to compete with Box, but weren't doing that well at that startup. That example of that release that we did, one of the things I was proudest about with that was that, again, I didn't write any of the stories. I kind of set up the customer problem that we had, briefed everyone on it, showed some videos of what the customers were struggling with, and then the team figured out what it is that we should build to solve that problem. And the biggest product feature, the solution that came out of that came from one of the junior developers that was like, oh, if that's the problem you're trying to solve, why don't we do this? And it turned out that was the cornerstone feature. It delivered 80% of the benefit and 20% of the effort. That was the first story on the board. And it was because he got that insight into what the customer was actually struggling with, not filtered through me, right? Kind of that raw information from the customer, seeing the actual problem, seeing the data, seeing the repeated feedback from customers, and then because he was an engineer and he understood the code base in a way that I would never be able to understand as a product manager, he could come up with the right solution to that problem. And I think, again, that's why I'm so passionate about autonomous cross-functional co-located teams that can work like that. And it's not always going to be the engineer, it'll be the designer, it'll be the user researcher, it'll be the product manager that comes up with the right idea. But it's because you have those kind of diverse opinions, those diverse experiences in that room that you can come up with the best possible problem. And I think it is a challenge when you start with a team that's kind of been so embedded in Scrum or something like that and so focused on delivering points and their burn down chart and stuff like that. But just start small, bring up one little thing that, here's a tiny little customer problem, how do we solve that? And get the team behind that and over time kind of build it up slowly so that you end up with that full autonomy where they're figuring out the whole thing basically. I hope that helps. But.
And by the way, on that, the one thing that we also have to keep in mind is the stage of maturity of a product makes a big difference on how you actually think about a team during the product. An incubation product is dealt very differently than something that's actually gotten to product market fit and trying to get to scale. It's very different than you've now gotten to scale and you're trying to make sure that you're optimizing it. They're just different stages in the life cycle. But going to your question on B2C and time spent, look, it's a dilemma that we are in right now because you want to make sure that, at some point in time, revenue is important for every company, and you have to make sure that you're making revenue. But when the revenue gets made without keeping in mind that the value is just not being created, so all I'm suggesting is that the measure when you just go out and base it on time spent rather than actually having something that's showing intrinsic value, you will have very different set of decisions that get made. That doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice ad revenue. You know, and by the way, Facebook showing this right now in the way that they're starting to change their behavior on what they're doing with how they're prioritizing certain kind of feeds going up and how they're, you know, like they of anyone are masters at making sure that they can monetize very effectively, but they're saying that there's actually a larger, you know, issue that needs to be dealt with. And whether they're saying it for press or whether they actually believe it, I actually feel like they're a pretty ethical organization when they believe what they say. You know, like I feel like that would be the thing that I would do is not just focus it on time spent. Time spent can be a metric in conjunction with a value metric, and then you'll actually have a very different outcome than if you just have a time spent metric. But here's the thing. If you just keep it as a time spent metric, there's very different decisions you can make in the product to achieve your metric than if you do a cross-section of time spent along with value, you know. There's a question here somewhere. There you go.
Thank you. Another organizational question for you. When, Martin, you described this concept of a team of teams, have you seen or do you have any ideas on how you scale that past just the product team, how you scale that across the entire organization?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen work really well is when you actually think about these nuclear teams across the organization, right? Not just in the product organization. So I think TransferWise, again, is a really great example because they've really gone hardcore on this, where their marketing team works like this as well. But they've thought about it even further in the fact that their marketing team, which is largely an online growth team, like a growth hacking team, right? Doesn't just have marketers and designers on it. They actually have their own full stack engineers, designers, product manager as well, and they can touch any part of the site as well. So it's also thinking about how they have the autonomy to touch any part of the product. So instead of a traditional marketing org, which would be all about, I'm going to throw a bunch of leads at a landing page and then it's a product's problem, this team actually owns the full throughput of not just getting leads, converting them, but it actually makes, you know, tracking them all the way to sales, retention, upsell, everything else, and can change the product to make that happen. I think that's the other big part about the autonomy. Because again, we have this classic, you know, Mexican standoff between marketing and product a lot of the time of like, I need these landing pages. Yeah, well, I need to build this product. So like, you're not going to get any resource. So marketing gets really frustrated and product doesn't care. But if you actually build the teams around that capability, then they have the capability they need to go do what they need to do in the site. So obviously, you might not take that to the nth degree. You might not have HR, might not have their own engineers and designers, but HR should function the same way and have whatever resources they need to be able to execute their goals internally. So I do think it's an organizational model that works across the org. It looks very different depending on what part of the org you're in. But yeah, I hope that
And
helps.
we've never met before today, but I can endorse it because we actually run Box exactly that way. So for example, we have a governance team. The governance team includes a product marketing person, includes a product manager, includes a designer, includes engineers. We have a zones team that has the same configuration. We have a skills team. We've got an integrations team. And so what we've tried to do, and the reason for that sometimes is, here's one of the big mistakes in enterprise software. Now, how many of you in enterprise versus B2C? How many with B2B? Okay, how many in B2C? Great. So on the, this is probably more relevant to the B2B folks. Don't build a product without deeply considering what your route to market is. Because oftentimes people don't understand the distribution channel and they build a product without understanding distribution. And then what ends up happening is you build this product, you're like, great, I built this product, now you have no way to sell it because you don't have a route to market to the economic buyer, right? And so then you're like, okay, so now I need to build a sales team. It's like, no, I already have 300 salespeople in my company. I'm not going to build a new sales team. Guess what? We're not going to actually sell this product because we don't have a route to market to that product. So it's really important to make sure that you have that cross-functional team because there are times when you won't think about those dimensions as you think, because it's not just about thinking of a problem. It's thinking about a problem to solve for which you have permission to solve, that you actually have access to the market and the economic buyer to effectively solve it. That actually makes that happen.
Thanks, Jitu and Martin, for the sharing insights. So one question that Jitu mentioned is solving the right problem and important problem. So I have two levels of questions. So one is, how do you identify questions and problems that are important to solve but might be very hard? So how do you kind of balance, for example, like how to improve emotional intelligence? I think it's an important problem, but for now it's probably very hard to solve. And then the second level is once you are kind of identified the area that you want to work on, for example, like helping businesses run their business online using software, then how do you, within that area, to identify what are the most important problems to solve? Thank you.
So, like I had mentioned earlier, I think your horizon of problem, the time span within which you're thinking about a problem should not be one product cycle. It should be multi-product cycle. So like you should be thinking about a problem from a 5 to 7 year window. This is one thing, by the way, that has hugely been damaging in Silicon Valley because of the success we've enjoyed. Most people think, and we face this at Box as well, every 9 months people think they need to get a promotion, right? Every 17 months they feel like they should have a double promotion, and by 2 years they feel I've completely mastered the job. And the reality is it takes a very long time to see varying cycles of a business to really understand how to do a job perfectly, right? And so the first part of your question is, I would actually pick hard problems because you will attract really good teams when you pick hard problems. And I would definitely not deter away from a problem just because it's super hard, right? I keep that in mind, and I think it just seems so tempting to do, but believe me on this one, like when you solve hard problems that are multi-year problems, you'll start chipping away at them, and before you know it, it'll be the most, do this exercise when you go back to your team. Ask people around the room what the favorite job was other than the one that they're currently working in, and why. And most of them will tell you, it was this one time when a few of us really banded together, and there was this impossible task that we had to get done within a really constrained amount of time, and we just made it happen, and it was the most fulfilling thing. It was hard as shit, right? And there's a reason why people climb Mount Everest, and there's a reason why people go to the marathon. People like challenges, so don't shy away from hard problems. I forgot the second part of the question.
Sure. Like if you identify an area, then how do you decide which problem to solve? That's more practical building products.
Yeah. So, and by the way, you might have a very hard problem. I'll give you an example of what we're doing right now, right? So a really hard problem that we have right now is if you think about the content, the way that you interact with content today, it's actually not changed in the past 25 years. You've got folders, subfolders, you actually browse through those, you open up a document, you look at the document, you get the data you want from the document. Massively uninspirational when you start thinking about the fact that for the past 25 years that hasn't changed, right? Now think about it. Imagine if you actually had an insurance policy. That insurance policy has data about the fact that your policy's kind of coverage is $2 million. And wouldn't it be nice if I just issued a natural language command, either with voice or text, that said, what's my coverage? It authenticates me based on my voice or my text, goes out and finds out what my coverage is from that document by using a machine learning algorithm, and comes back to me not with a search result of the document for which I have to go to page 47 to open up in paragraph 3 what the coverage is, but just to be able to tell me your coverage is $2 million. And imagine the level of friction you would take out. That is a really hard problem to solve across all document classes, right? Because what you're doing is you're trying to make every piece of unstructured data completely structured, which might take us a decade to solve. That is a problem that we're going to embark on. Now, how are we going to do that? We're going to actually start chipping away at that little by little. So the first thing we did was we said, let's make sure that we really enrich the metadata by extracting it, and what's possible today to do. So the first thing we did was we said, let's take image, video, and audio, and let's extract all the data automatically from image, video, and audio and populate the metadata with it. So if I have sentiment analysis, if I have facial recognition on a frame, on every single frame of the video, let's make sure that we have an ML algorithm that can be applied to that. That was V1. We did that, and that's what we're launching, and we actually released a product called Box Skills. The second thing that we'll do is we'll say, now start going out and understanding text documents and see what's going on. And then you keep iterating on that problem, but the true north of that would be, it should be completely frictionless. I need to get an answer from my documents, which I have access to securely, by just asking a simple question and getting a simple answer. I should be able to solve that problem. It's probably going to take us 7 to 10 years to solve that problem. We'll do it in multi-phase approach, but the way that we're breaking it down is saying, don't start with the hardest piece first. Start with the easier pieces for which technology has gotten mature, and then over time, progressively reveal what the problem needs to be. Yeah.
One way to think about it is your kind of long-term vision or mission is all about a big problem, right? And you could actually argue that a lot of these problems don't actually change, right? I mean, Box and Slack are all about workplace communication and collaboration, which is something we've been doing for a very long time. That need hasn't gone away. Our ability to do it differently and do it better is changing, but the fundamental customer need is pretty static. So I think make sure that you pick the big problems, so that it's something that is valuable enough to actually go after. And then the harder problem is how you add the most value, right? So if you pick a really hard problem to solve, you're more likely to add value and differentiate yourself and hit that 10x point, 10x improvement point. That means that you will differentiate yourself in the market.
Thank you so much.
Hang on, before we end, can I ask for an exercise from the room? Is that possible? Can I do that? Yeah? Okay. So everyone, if you can close your eyes for a second, keep your fist out, and then on the count of 3, 5 means this was an amazing session, 3 means this was terrible, and 1 means we need a lot of work in our core thinking. But keep your eyes closed when you do that, get the number out, and then after that open your eyes, okay? So 1, 2, 3. That's great, man. You're a stud.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers.